This is an event that's put on by the Forest Fire Lookout Association at towers all across New York State to honor the memory of the people who served in these towers when the system was in operation. And so we read aloud the names, and for Dickinson Hill, we have William Claus, Glenford Simmons, Charles E. Simmons, Mrs. Elise M. Simmons, Helen Ellet, Frank Babcock, Geraldine Lewis, Mrs. Thyra O'Brien, Robert C. Forbes, Helen Ellet, and Irma Maxon.
Do you have the years for each of those or no?
Yes. William Claus was June of 1924 until November of 1940. Glenford Simmons, April 5th, 1941 to November 1941. Charles Simmons, April 13th, 1942 to September 10th, 1942. Elise M. Simmons, September 11th, 1942 to October 31st, 1942. Helen Ellet, April 10th, 1943 to October 1953. Frank Babcock, April 1954 to September 1954. Geraldine Lewis, April 16th, 1955 to May 31st, 1955. Mrs. Thyra O'Brien, June 16th, 1955 to November 7th, 1956. Robert Forbes, May 1957 to October 1958. Helen Ellet, April 1959 to June 4th, 1965. And Irma Maxon, June 5th, 1965 to November 11th, 1972.
Thank you.
Hey Chris, can you tell us what the routine was of the firewood and the fire steward up there? Like if they spotted smoke, what was the process early on?
Well, for the first 2 years the tower was in existence, there were no means of communication, so there was no phone or anything in it. So if you saw smoke from up in the tower, you had to get a bearing on it and then write that information down and basically climb down out of the tower and ride into town to someplace with a phone to call the district ranger. And then the district ranger had to wait for 2 other towers to do the same thing before they could make a decision about whether or not it was a fire that needed seeing to. Once the phone was in place, the observers could talk to each other. So I imagine the process for verifying that we, yes, had an active fire was much quicker. But even though it sounds kind of slow by today's standards, it was a remarkably effective system because the incidence of wildfires decreased dramatically in the years after these towers were built. And that's pretty much the way it worked until, my understanding is, until after the Second World War, when other means such as radios and using aircraft to monitor for fires came into greater use by the state. And after a time, the state decided that having people in fire towers was less efficient than these other methods, so they started to phase the system out. And by the 80s, all of the towers were closed and essentially abandoned.
And they were using air aircraft, right?
Yes.
After you shut the fire.
Can you tell us about the 1908 fire, the circumstances that led to it up at Sebatis?
Oh, the 1908 fire in Sebatis was, well, it was a fire that started in the woods. One of the reasons that a lot of fires started in the North Woods was because there were a lot of logging operations going on up there. And one of the ways that they used to haul the wood out of the woods was to run a rail line into the area that was being logged. And of course, the motive power that they were using was steam locomotives back then. So, and locomotives and fire in the Adirondacks continued to be a problem well into the 20th century. But in Sebatis, there was also no efficient way to report the fire, so they basically had to send somebody to the next village that had a telegraph station to let the outside world know that they needed help. And what was the quickest way to get them the help in there? A steam train. So it just spread the fire.
Because they were burning wood.
And well, out west they used to have these things on their smokestacks called spark arresters, and I don't know why, that seems not to have been a thing around here for some reason. But the thing that really made the 1908 fire devastating was that it hit a local supplier's warehouse that contained something like 1,500 pounds of dynamite and several thousand gallons of kerosene or gasoline or something like that, and it obliterated the town of West Long Lake. And when they went back in after the fire was finally out, the only thing they could find was these big lumps of metal that were what used to be barrels of nails that had just fused together from the heat of the fire. That was, probably that was one of a couple of events that led to the establishment of the system. There were several fires in the very early part of the 20th century. There was one in 1903 that burned up something like 400,000 acres of woodland, and people reported being able to smell the smoke in New York City and being able to see it in Washington, D.C. So, those of us who have experienced Canadian wildfires, we have an idea of what that feels like. So yeah, the state decided that they needed a system, and they started building these towers. And the first ones that they built were just go into the bushes and cut down a few trees and make some poles and throw up a tower. And the problem with those was they kept burning down. So they decided that they should make them out of steel, and they contracted with two companies, the Air Motor Company and the International Derrick Company. I believe Air Motor made windmills and International Derrick made oil rigs, but they both had the necessary expertise to create towers like this. And this is an air motor tower, 60 feet. There are towers in the system. I think the tallest tower in the New York State system, at least that still exists, is 98 feet high.
How tall is the one in Hunter Mountain, do you know?
I do not know that offhand,
It's down there a couple months ago.
but I have been to the tower that was just rebuilt at Bramley Mountain, and that is 80 feet high. And I'm used to 60 feet, so when I started going up above 60 feet, I was just sort of like, okay.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's quite an experience.
Hey Chris, can you tell us a little bit about Fire Tower Stewards?
The tower stewards are volunteers who are trained by the Forest Fire Lookout Association to spend time at the tower, and we act as educators, and we teach visitors about the history of the tower system and the reason that these towers were built, and the history of this. At this site, we teach about this particular site with using a lot of the information that we have from prior observers. Thanks mainly to Helen Ellet's family. And but we also educate the public about the principles of leave no trace, responsible hiking practices, the necessity of being well prepared if you're going into the woods. And we keep an eye on the place for the park, and by extension, I guess, the state police. We pick up litter, we clean up the cab if it's been hit by taggers with graffiti, and we keep an eye on the condition of the trail coming up from the Long Pond parking lot.
Do you know if anybody has tried to contact the families of the other observers?
I do not know that, no. I would have to talk to the head of the New York chapter of the FFLA for that.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to know who they are and what their stories are.
Well, there's something of a fraternity, I guess, because, and this person, would know, if anybody, because her father was the observer at Balsam Lake,
Oh,
so she grew up around fire towers.
is that Lori?
Yeah, that's Lori. So she probably knew a lot of them when she was growing up.
Now, if I had to guess, I would say that light right there is the other fire tower.
Through the cut in the wood.
That over there?
That's what I'm,
Well,
I don't know what else it would,
there are numerous towers around here that have beacons on top of them. So
The one that's on private land, what direction is it in, do you know, or?
well,